I'm Josh Christensen.
I'm Kristin Toussaint.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, Fast Company contributing writer Adam Bluestein.
Especially with technology, people are able to start, quote unquote, a mining company that's really a technology company.
The chairman of NBCUniversal Media Group, Matt Strauss.
When you're building a streaming service, there's really two key components: what drives acquisition and what drives engagement and retention.
And as always, keeping tabs.
There's been this fear that most of the internet is just going to be AI bots talking to each other, like the dead internet theory. And they were like, we'll just make that happen now.
Yeah. But first, here's the download. The news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
Disney has finally named Bob Iger's successor. Josh D'Amaro will take over as the next CEO of the entertainment conglomerate in March. D'Amaro has been with Disney since 1998 and currently chairs Disney Experiences, where he oversees the company's 12 theme parks, 57 hotels, cruises, the Imagineering unit, and Disney consumer products. This isn't the first time someone has been picked to succeed Iger at the helm. Bob Chapek succeeded Iger in 2020, but then the Disney board brought Iger back in 2022 after its share price faltered.
We're going to be talking more about Disney next week with David Litsky on the podcast, so come back for some analysis of how we got here. It's the weirdest real-world succession that we've had.
Yeah, there's been a lot of ups and downs there.
Boar on the floor at the Port Orleans at Disney World must have been crazy. Elon Musk? Oh, God, we can't have a newscast without Elon Musk. Elon Musk is merging his rocket maker, SpaceX, and his artificial intelligence startup, xAI. The deal brings the company's valuation over $1 trillion ahead of its likely IPO at some point this year. That's the highest valuation for a private company, I think, ever. Merging his AI company with his space company also seems to align with Musk's claim to power the needs of AI, we're going to need to put data centers in space.
Data centers in space.
I just have the pigs in space theme stuck in my head, which I guess fits for more than one way with Elon Musk.
At the end of last week, more than 3 million more pages of files related to Jeffrey Epstein were released by the Justice Department. Attention has fallen on several prominent names that appear from the worlds of politics, business, academia, and beyond. One is Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, whose name appears in both notes from Epstein and emails from 2013, which allege that Gates had extramarital affairs. A representative for Gates says the claims are absolutely absurd and completely false. Tech billionaire Elon Musk also appears in a 2012 message where he asks Epstein when the, quote, wildest party on your island, end quote, will be. On Saturday, Musk wrote on X that some of his email correspondences with Epstein could be, quote, misinterpreted and used by detractors to smear my name. Beyond those two tech billionaires, other business leaders who are facing scrutiny due to this batch of files include Howard Lutnick, Apollo Global Manager co-founder Mark Rowan, New York Giants co-owner Steve Tisch, Google co-founder Sergey Brin, and the Paul Weiss law firm chairman Brad Karp, who, as of last night, has resigned from his position.
Alphabet-owned autonomous vehicle company Waymo, also MIC company. I think they were number one on the list last year. I should know this, but it was very high up. I think they were the number one or the number two company on our list in 2025. Anyways, they're taking big steps to expand their driverless fleet of taxis internationally. In a funding round led by Sequoia Capital, DST Group, and Dragoneer Investment Group, Waymo raised $16 billion, putting its current valuation at $126 billion. The company says that the money will be used to fuel its growth to cities like London and Tokyo, as well as dozens of others.
And finally, President Donald Trump announced this week that tariffs on imports from India will be lowered from 25% to 18%. The move comes after Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi agreed to stop buying oil from Russia. As part of the deal, India will also buy $500 billion worth of American goods, like oil and natural gas, and begin to reduce import taxes on U.S. products to zero. The deal comes shortly after the European Union and India agreed on a comprehensive trade deal that would allow for free trade between India and EU members, as well as reduce the import taxes currently levied on India for European cars and wine.
It wouldn't be a newscast without tariffs and Elon Musk's every single time. And that's the news you need to know today. So, Kristin, what did you major in college?
I majored in journalism, straight up.
So you moved, I majored in theater, as listeners know, and then I got my master's degree in journalism, had a bit of a career change over there. So you majored in journalism. If you didn't major in journalism, or if you could go back and say, like, that was off the table, you can't be a journalist, what would you have majored in?
Honestly, I think about this sometimes because to me, journalism was such it's an applicable career. It was like, okay, I want to be a journalist. I studied journalism. I didn't really understand how other majors led to certain jobs, right? What does it mean to study something like engineering? Like, what do you do afterwards? So I don't think I knew enough. I probably would have needed, what was that book? What Color is Your Parachute? Do you remember that?
Oh my God, that I haven't thought about that for such a long time.
I would have had to look at that a little bit more to be like, what's a major that leads to an actual career that is not something as straightforward as journalism?
Yeah, that is true. I think I had the same thing with majoring in theater. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to write plays and act in things, but not that it leads to a career necessarily guaranteed.
Well,
in theory, it could.
Yeah,
but
not always.
There's a direct line to something, maybe, if you could have it. What would you have said if someone came up to you as like, hey, you want to work on mines?
Mines. I probably would have thought of that scene in Zoolander. Well, I wouldn't have any experience about mines, but not all mines are the same, as we learned.
We're talking about this because, there's probably a lot of college kids out there wondering, or high school kids wondering what to major in. And oh boy, do we have a job category for you. So the current state of the job market can be best described as meh. Companies, with some exceptions, have slowed their hiring, while we're also seeing sizable layoffs at companies like Amazon, not to mention the continued fallout from mass layoffs in the federal government. But one job is hiring and in need of more workers: mine engineering. Kristin and I talked to Fast Company contributing writer Adam Bluestein about the hottest career in the country. Hey, Adam, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. Great to be with you again.
So I'm going to start with a very basic question, which is essentially, what exactly does mining engineering mean? Kristin and I were talking before we started recording that, like, engineering has become a very much like a catch-all title. And I imagine it has something to do with getting underneath or into the ground.
Yeah.
But I'm not really sure what it means in the specific. So can you give me a little bit of an overview of what mining engineering is?
Sure, I'll do my best. Mining engineering is sort of all the technical stuff that goes into getting minerals out of the earth. So it includes the design of mines, the operation of mines, the closing down of mines, and sometimes mining engineering, depending on the program, also covers metal processing, but there's a little bit of a separation there, and maybe we can talk about some of that later. But essentially, it's all the technical and scientific stuff that goes into getting metals out of the earth. How's that?
That's a great primer on mining. And like I've always said, a mine is a terrible thing to waste.
Yes, it is. And we've been wasting them.
Anyways, stupid puns aside, your story is primarily about the revitalization of mining programs at some U.S. colleges. So can you tell me about these schools, or like which schools are restarting these mining programs and why now?
Yeah, so it's interesting. This was one of the first things that got us interested in the subject was seeing that a school like Columbia University in New York City is actually restarting its mining program after a few decades. Interestingly enough, Columbia had the first mining engineering program of a U.S. university, which is kind of crazy considering its location. For maybe a few decades, this program became sort of merged into environmental sciences and environmental engineering. And now that there's a lot of interest in actually mining again, they are reviving this program. There's some other schools. University of Texas in El Paso is a big one. There is not another mining engineering program in Texas, so this will be the one, and that's going to start next fall. And that program's been on hiatus for about 60 years now.
Oh, wow. That's such a huge gap between with these programs. Like, why were they sort of neglected for so long? And why is it a big deal that they're coming back?
Yeah, well, mining has been really out of fashion in the United States for some time. And, we can think about some of the obvious reasons. There's a lot of NIMBYism, so mining can have a really big environmental impact. Processing metals is traditionally a pretty dirty business. So there have been a lot of people, communities that don't want a mine nearby or don't want a metals processing plant nearby. And it's been convenient enough for decades, really, to basically import the metals that we needed for industry, with some exceptions. I mean, we continue to mine coal here, we do iron here, but for a lot of the metals that are becoming very highly valued now, the United States has basically been content as a nation to let other countries, and particularly China, to sort of take over this area. And we've kind of given up in a lot of ways on big parts of the mining sector.
Are we talking rare earths? I feel like that's a phrase I've heard more in the past year and a half than I've ever heard before in my life.
You're hearing it a lot. Yeah, so there's two terms that you'll hear a lot. There's critical materials or critical minerals, and then a piece of that is rare earth or rare earth elements. Basically, you've got your metals like, say, copper or zinc or lithium, things that we've heard of. And then there are these rare elements, and rare doesn't mean that there aren't any of them in the world. They actually exist all over the place, but they're not very concentrated. So they're contained in other metals, and they're very hard to extract from these other metal deposits. And so what makes them rare is just that it's really hard to process them out of the earth. And they're very valuable once they're processed and turned into the metals that we need. They're used, like a lot of these minerals we're talking about, in things like the semiconductor industry, in consumer electronics, in space, defense, a whole bunch of sort of high-tech projects.
There's obviously a major need for more mining engineers that the U.S. is not currently meeting with the types of graduates. Can you give us an idea of, like, one, what are the numbers that we're looking at? And then what are the main challenges to scaling this and ramping up so that we can meet that demand?
Yeah, so the numbers are really interesting. The industry and the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, they put out these forecasts for different job titles. So when they're talking about mining engineers, they're forecasting about 400 job openings every year through 2034. So basically through the next decade. And like 400 annual job openings doesn't sound like a lot of jobs, but consider that the people graduating from mining engineering programs every year is now about a little over 300 people graduating from programs. So you have a pretty big gap there between demand and supply. And the problem with boosting this supply of mining engineers is that all these programs that trained mining engineers have gone away. Now some of them are coming back, and they just haven't been very strongly represented compared to other sorts of engineering majors over the last couple of decades as other things became more popular. So there's definitely this ramping up that people in the industry are hoping to see happen now.
There's also like a geopolitical implication here of why U.S. schools may be wanting to ramp this up. China is doing quite well in terms of pumping out mining engineering professionals. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, China has incredible programs. Their universities' programs dwarf ours. One statistic I saw is that just their biggest mineral processing program at Central South University, they have something like 1,000 undergrads, 500 graduate students there preparing for the field. They have many more programs than we have. And just strategically, in terms of supply, not only does China produce the majority of most of these critical minerals and rare earths, but they process even more of it. So whereas other countries, including the US, we actually mine a lot of copper, but countries send the raw materials to China because China, over the last couple of decades, has built up a huge infrastructure of processing facilities to actually convert the raw ore into usable products. So they really have a huge lead on mining, but even more so processing.
This is an industry that I think we're like all aware of and becoming more aware of, but I wouldn't think to study it, or especially if I were like starting college now, I don't even know if it would occur to me. Like,
Yeah.
I studied theater as an undergrad, so I'm like, I was as far away from this as possible.
But it's like, especially since schools are sort of, these programs are just getting started again, like how are they reaching students? How are students sort of becoming aware of this? Are they like pitching them on this as a path?
Yeah, well, it's a big challenge. And so some of the professors and department heads who I spoke to for this story talk about the challenge of just familiarity, because if you're in a city, for example, there's not many mines in or even that close to cities, and you're really only aware of mining as an activity if you're maybe living someplace out west or in coal country where there are actual mines. So people don't see a lot of mines and they don't know a lot of miners. So that's a big challenge, is just raising awareness. So at some of these schools, like Colorado School of Mines, they actually have their own demo mine on campus, which is
That's
cool.
crazy. Yeah.
So you can go.
Like a
That's
demo
so cool.
mine.
That does remind me of, like, I went to University of Rhode Island, and one of the major programs that they had there was a marine biology program, partly because we were on the coast and they had a submarine. And it was just like, oh, that is so damn cool. Yeah. No wonder people want to do this
study
program.
This,
yeah, it's amazing. And actually, another program department head talked about just the appeal of the machinery, right? So what initially drew him to the field was that there are these really cool, giant machines. And so I think that's kind of a big part of getting people excited about this. There are tremendous, earth movers, boring machines. There are a lot of robotic tools, autonomous vehicles. There's big, real stuff that if people can see in person, it's kind of mind-blowing. It's just that a lot of people don't get to see it, and they're not aware of these opportunities.
I can imagine that also helps dispel the myth of what a miner does, right? Like you said before, it's like you might associate it with a sort of just physical coal mining job, but it's so technical now.
It's really technical now. So one of the big changes that you'll see in the curricula, right? Plural, Latin, at these
cacti.
in these engineering programs is there are classes on AI, on machine learning. There are classes on robotics. And AI tools are increasingly being integrated in the mineral discovery process. And, a lot of the jobs at a mine aren't going underground, digging things up. They're sort of sitting in a control room, monitoring all the dials, making sure the computers are working. So it's not all going down into the coal mine.
I want to stick on the technology part of this. Obviously, AI is such a huge, part of this profession, an increasing part of every single profession, and we talk about it way too much on the show, and we're going to keep talking about it. Can you dig in a little bit more to that particular side of the technology? Because I also imagine that this is spurring on a lot of like entrepreneurship within this industry as well.
One thing that people in academia pointed out was that the mining industry has always been dominated by these big, major multinational conglomerates, Rio Tinto, BHT, there's Freeport McMoran, which is a big Australian company. And so you would basically go to work for one of these companies once you graduated. Now, especially with technology, people are able to start, quote unquote, a mining company that's really a technology company. And these kind of companies lend themselves to venture investments. They are real startups. So you had this company, Phoenix Tailings, MIT founders. They raised like $76 million last year. And they're doing this next generation advanced rare earth processing facility actually in New Hampshire.
So in addition to mining engineers, has there been an emergence of other adjacent professions or positions within this industry?
The way that this was explained to me is that the career buckets that people normally go into would be like, there's all these new jobs in critical minerals, like we're talking about. Then there are jobs in, it's called like construction aggregate, which is basically like gravel and sand and just basic building materials, which is a really huge industry too. And there's a bunch of mining services. So basically like all these machines, computers that somehow are interacting with the mining industry. There are people handling those relationships. And then one thing that's really interesting that came out in my reporting was how closely connected environmental engineering and mining engineering are. So a lot of the concerns cross over from one field to the other. So there's a big interest in clean water supply, managing mine operations in a way that keeps the water good, dealing with tailings, which is all the leftover rock once you smash what you need out of it. How do you handle that in a way that's sensitive to the local ecology? Managing carbon, lowering the carbon footprint of mining is really important. And even though we might think in the US right now that it's in fact true that a lot of the like environmental regulations have been loosened a little bit, mining is a really global industry, and a lot of these are international companies who sort of have a mandate to do things in a sustainable way. And they operate around the world where it's expected that they're going to. So from what I've gathered, it's more than just lip service that the industry does care about the environment and sustainability. So a person could graduate with a mining engineering degree and then essentially go into an environmental engineering role because it's a lot of the same expertise there.
What else is happening, not just in these colleges, but like on the policy level for mining?
Yeah, quite a lot. In his second term, Donald Trump has done a lot to make mining easier in the US. So making the permitting process easier, making access to the land easier, loosening some of the environmental regulations, shortening the review process. Those are just like general policy things. And then the administration and different departments of the US government have been investing lots of money, like multi-million-dollar investments into different programs. So some of these have gone into specific companies, and really just in the last 6 months and even the last month, there's been a lot going on. So in the summer, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, took a $400 million stake in a company called MP Materials. So they're a mining company developing critical minerals, rare earth materials, and they guaranteed them a floor price on certain minerals, which was seen as really a big deal because China supports their industry in a big way. And a lot of people say, well, the US needs to do it in the same way and not just say, we're going to buy a bunch of stuff from you, but we're going to buy it at X price for as long as you can produce it. They've been backing away from that floor price for other companies a little bit, but they've made similar equity investments in other companies. There's one called Lithium Americas Corporation, which mines lithium. We actually have one of the biggest lithium reserves in the world at a place called Thacker Pass in Nevada. And so Lithium Americas Corporation is developing that site, and they actually have a joint venture with GM, General Motors, to develop that site. So the Department of Energy has a 5% equity stake in both projects, in Lithium Americas and in the joint venture. And they've also given about $2 billion in loans toward that project. And then just yesterday afternoon, Trump announced something called Project Vault, which is a $12 billion initiative. It involves GM, Stellantis, Boeing, Google, who with the U.S. Export-Import Bank are ponying up to $12 billion to ensure the strategic reserve of critical minerals for all of these U.S. companies. So that's a pretty big deal. And that's not strictly about boosting capacity in the U.S. So some of that is about ensuring we can still import what we need, but a lot of that supposedly should go toward developing U.S. facilities.
I don't know if this came up in your reporting, but is there ever a point at which we could stop importing, or is that an expectation of our mining industry that we will always sort of have to supplement?
That's a good question. So there are a lot of minerals in the U.S. And one interesting thing that sort of maybe goes against some of our preconceptions about mining is that these minerals are really close to the surface. So we're not digging mines to go and get them. We're really scraping them off, and they're quite close to the surface. So a lot of these are surface mines, or these sort of big circular, spiral mines that you've seen out west. If you've ever flown out across the western states, you can actually see them. So the thing is just to develop them. There's a lot of material that's here, and it's developing the mines, developing the processing facilities, and that just kind of takes time. But from a pure geology perspective, we have most of this stuff here in the domestic U.S.
And we'll have all of it if we take Greenland. So,
well, Greenland's pretty interesting. If you've got a second on Greenland.
Let's talk Greenland.
Yeah, so if you take seriously the natural resource claim on Greenland, they have one of the biggest graphite resources in the world there. Graphite's a big deal for advanced batteries, for example, and there's different kinds of graphite.
I was going to say Big Ticonderoga.
So there's different kinds of graphite. There's pencil graphite, and then there's this very fine sort of graphite that they use in high-tech applications. And Greenland has a lot of that, and there's a European consortium that's developing that now. Actually, this mine that's been closed for decades is opening up again in Greenland, and Greenland is something like maybe the 6th biggest source of rare earth elements in the world, or believed to hold that much. So there's significant resources there.
I think that's a great place to end this segment. Genuinely, this is one of my favorite types of stories we do at Fast Company here, this weird, very niche way into a story that hits on work life, hits on tech, hits on,
sustainability,
geopolitics, sustainability, just finds our way in. And I always love these type of stories. So Adam, thanks so much for taking us through this. We'll be back with Adam and Kristin a little bit later for Keeping Tabs. But first, a quick break, followed by Jeff Beer's interview with chairman of NBCUniversal Media Group, Matt Strauss. I have a confession to make. I am not a big fan of the Olympics. Kristin, are you a fan of the Olympics?
I do love the Olympics.
I never got into it. Summer or winter Olympics, I'm it's just never been for me. It's just not my thing. So every 2 years, people like you get really into it. And I'm basically like, all right, cool. Peace out later. And I miss all the coverage of the games. But when the 2024 Paris Olympics came along, it was basically impossible to avoid seeing at least some of the events and some of the content created around the Olympics. And I did get into it a little bit for the first time, not like crazy into it. I had a friend, Ellen, who like just kept, she's still my friend. I don't know why I said that in past tense. She would text me every single day about the Olympics, and I think that's what got my algorithm to send me things.
Start,
yeah. And at some point, like halfway through, I was finally like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll talk to Ellen about the Olympics. Anyways, the reason why the Olympics broke through, even to haters like me, was largely due to NBC Universal's supercharged content strategy. They had 7,000 hours of coverage that ranged from primetime events on NBC to comedic correspondents like Snoop Dogg and Colin Jost and Kevin Hart doing random things. They had Gold Zone. Did you watch any of the Gold Zone coverage?
Yes.
That was great. It's like the NFL Red Zone, but for the Olympics. Such a great idea. And then they also had a bunch of creator partnerships that generated billions of impressions on social media platforms. So now, with the 2026 Winter Olympics starting tomorrow, how is NBCU going to top itself? Senior writer Jeff Beer talked to chairman of NBCUniversal Media Group, Matt Strauss, about the network's plans for their legendary February. Here's that conversation.
Matt, thanks so much for being here. It's a pleasure to talk to you. This is a huge sports month for you guys at NBC Universal. The Super Bowl, the Winter Olympics, NBA All-Star, legendary February, I believe you guys are calling it.
Yeah, it is an exciting time to be at our company because not only do we have all these amazing events, it's also our 100-year anniversary at NBC.
This is what I'm going to say. This is the February to kick off a big year.
You know, it's kind of remarkable because I've been at the company for over 20 years, but every time I come into 30 Rock, I still get goosebumps. Like, it's just a reminder of just the legacy of the company. And there's so many amazing things about NBC that I didn't even realize that NBC had the first coast-to-coast radio broadcast, the first commercial, the first morning talk show. And then to have that coincide with this unbelievable 26 where we've got, like you said, the Super Bowl, the World Cup on Telemundo later this summer. Obviously, we got the NBA All-Star Game. We've got the Milan Cortina Olympics. Like, when you look at this through the lens of big events, about 40% of all of the major events, this year are going to be on NBC. And so it's just like a really awesome moment for our company. And it's a huge responsibility that we all take really seriously.
That got me thinking, because so much, if you're kind of in the day-to-day news cycle, certainly if you work in media, but like I feel like particularly maybe in a broad generalization, but over the last couple of decades, so much of the emphasis in media has been on the new shiny things. Mm-hmm. And an occasion like a 100th anniversary really gives an opportunity to, I'm not talking about new and shiny, like obviously tools and things like that, but like, I feel like legacy media and that even term it's been turned into kind of a dirty word. And I feel like 100 years is an opportunity for a company like NBC to kind of remind people of some of these things you're kind of talking about and what that actually means, whether it comes to kind of reliability and the positive side of legacy. How do you think about celebrating that kind of milestone and what it means for NBC?
Well, it's a really good insight because even though NBC is a traditional broadcast network, the legacy, our history, is really one of disruption and one of innovation. When you think about some of those things I mentioned, to go from a radio company into broadcast, we obviously expanded into cable as pay television started to evolve. And then, of course, with Peacock, we expanded into streaming. Like, you have a company that is constantly reinventing itself. And in many ways, your insight of being almost able to look backwards and say, what could we learn about being a student of the business? How did that impact the business? And what does that mean going forward? Like, a lot of that thinking actually went into how we created Peacock. Because what's interesting, Jeff, and you may know this, but we celebrated our 5-year anniversary of Peacock last July. And it's kind of amazing to think about how much has changed in 5 years. If you go back to 2020 and you think about the landscape of television, most media companies were very focused on one streaming player, and the future was ad-free, scripted dramas, binge viewing. You even had some executives saying live television is dead. And knowing our pedigree, knowing what we know about how people engage with television, how they navigate video choices, not only at NBC, but obviously our parent company, Comcast, that never really synced up with what we saw in the data, and this is where it's kind of interesting when you have the history, you can look for patterns. And one of the things that we identified when we were building Peacock, there's not a lot of benefit to being late to a market like we were, but you can start to see white space. And the white space we saw was that linear and live is still very much how people like to engage with television. It's part of the zeitgeist, and it's what connects so much of us. Are those big moments like the Super Bowl or like the Olympics? We looked at our broadcast company and said, 2 revenue streams is better than 1. And so while everybody was focused on subscription, we said, well, maybe subscription and advertising, having, a dual revenue stream plays to our strengths. Again, that to us has made a lot of sense that the eyeballs, as they shifted more to streaming, so would the ad dollars. And so we really wanted to anchor ourselves around that. And so when we launched this product 5 years ago, it was very different than anything else in the market. And when you look at where we are today, a lot of it is an extension of that broadcast heritage. We went for a broad-based streaming service where we were targeting a household demographic, but we also wanted to deliver something for everybody in the home. And so, yes, scripted dramas are important. So are movies. But, you know what else is important is sports and news and unscripted. And so when you think about what we have done over the last few years, we've been very consistent with our vision and our strategy. And I think that that's put us in a very unique place in the landscape as far as what we've done with Peacock and how we manage Peacock, because a lot of it really is a derivative of the broadcast company and NBC and that legacy that we were talking about.
It's funny you say that, because I think that there was a precursor. Speaking of, this will lead into my next question, but before you guys were even thinking of a streaming strategy as a Peacock or a separate, like a service, I remember as a English Premier League fan that, you guys would have a game on linear, and then all the games, it was like, for a soccer fan, it was like revolutionary. You'd have every single game on the weekend online. And that was, to me, kind of like an obvious precursor. Certainly you must have learned things from that and probably other sports, but that stuck out in my brain because that's what I watched. But like, that was, again, as a soccer fan, that was kind of revolutionary in the sense of what was possible and available, and showed the appetite for, obviously you can program a couple games here and there like we all see in all sports, but that must have provided some insights for when you guys were figuring out the strategy going forward.
Well, it certainly did. The product you were referring to, it used to be called NBC Gold.
Right.
And it was a subscription service that was geared towards more targeted sports, just like you're describing. And it absolutely influenced the strategy. When you're building a streaming service, there's really 2 key components: what drives acquisition and what drives engagement and retention. And the benefit of sports has always been that there's a large TAM, like there's a large addressable market that watch the NFL, that watch the NBA, that watch the Premier League. And so we were able to calculate early on that if you've got all these fans and we know how big they are, and if we can migrate them over to Peacock, that is going to be a huge opportunity for us to grow subscribers, but super serve those fans. And the key about how you have to balance this, or at least the way that we tried to balance it, is sports we realized was a huge opportunity for us, again, because that's not what most people were doing.
Right.
5 years ago. We were supposed to launch Peacock right around the Tokyo Olympics. And then, of course, there was a global pandemic, but we recognized that sports was this huge opportunity for us. But then the key was also sports fans watch movies, sports fans watch television, sports fans typically watch other content. And so having a service that, was timely, that would drive people to want to open it up every single day, which is, again, the opposite of binge viewing. It's about how do you actually create daily habituation? Sports and live events are a great way to do that. And then once they watch the Premier League, showing them a movie, showing them a TV show, showing them the thousands and thousands of hours of content that we have, that was kind of the balancing of how we believed would play to our strengths as a company. And by anchoring ourselves in the market that way, we didn't see ourselves as competing head to head with other streaming services. We saw ourselves as complementary. You don't need to decide between us and somebody else. We fit nicely with other streaming services that were more focused at the time around dramas and scripted programming. And so the other insight, and you kind of alluded to this, is when you do sports, the tolerance of a sports fan, when the video isn't working, when there's pixelation, when the sound quality, like it's zero.
Yeah.
Like it has to work. And so this was another important insight that we had, which is as we were building the service and aggregating more and more sports rights at a time, again, where a lot of people were questioning whether or not sports was going to continue to have audiences in the streaming world, we clearly believed that sports would continue to grow. We also wanted to build a platform that was designed for live programming at scale. And that was another important component to our strategy, which is live was not an afterthought. And so when we built our platform, we designed it in a way that it had to be as reliable as television. Like when you turn on the TV, it just works and it's 99.99% reliable. We spent 2 years hardening the platform, and I wouldn't let the product teams focus on new features or shiny objects. I'm like, what I want you to focus on is how quickly does the app open? What's the latency? How many concurrent users can we have? And to the credit of the team, they really built, in my opinion, a best-in-class platform. And so when you have these major events, like an exclusive playoff game or the Olympics or the Premier League, I feel like we really have delivered and continue to strive to deliver, really best-in-class experiences where you don't have to worry about the modality of the technology. You're able to just enjoy the content as a fan.
Yeah, you're not worried in the back of your head as if you're going to get the circle of death or whatever it is in the middle of the screen.
Exactly. And that's not easy. It's not an easy
no.
It's not an easy thing to deliver upon. And we're really proud of what we've been able to build.
That brings me to I was going to ask you about how you define innovation.
I think it starts with goals. Like, what are you really trying to accomplish? And sometimes, product teams and engineering teams, they could build things because they can, they want to build them, and so I think that what we've tried to do is approach it really as a discipline, which is we're trying to super serve fandoms. We're trying to surprise and delight fandoms. We're trying to give people more reasons to want to open up our app every single day. And really, when you think about what the battle is, so to speak, in the industry, it's really about time. Where do people spend their time? How do you grow more share of time? And so when we approach things around innovation, we're constantly stress testing the innovation around, does it accomplish those goals? Does this really add more value to the fan? Will it help drive more engagement? Does it make our platform stickier? And are we also surprising and delighting them? Like, are we doing something that they didn't expect? And to accomplish that, a part of it is also a bit of a management philosophy, because coming from Comcast, being there for 20 years, Comcast is a matrixed organization. And so to really thrive in that environment, in my experience, you need to be incredibly collaborative. You need to have open communication. You need to trust other teams because you're constantly doing handoffs in a matrixed organization. And you also want a culture where people are not afraid to fail, where people are not afraid to provide their ideas or their opinions. And I've tried to embody that culture at NBC. And it's something I'm very proud of, because creating a culture where people can feel like they can share, They could challenge the status quo. They could put forward ideas that might sometimes seem counterintuitive. Not everything's going to work, but if it doesn't work and you fail fast, and we learn from it. That environment is where innovation typically comes from. It doesn't usually come top down. I am not the smartest person in the room. I surround myself with people smarter than me, and I try to create an environment where people can innovate. And so the result of that are things like what happened in Paris, where Paris was a really special moment for us as a company. But I also feel like Paris was one of those moments where we were able to flex the innovation. What do we mean when we say we want to surprise and delight the viewer or give them different ways to engage as a fan? I think you saw some of that on one of the biggest stages, which was the Olympics. And the team, just in my opinion, did a fantastic job delivering upon that innovation.
NBC, I think, correct me if my history's wrong here, had its first Olympic Games broadcast in 1964 in Tokyo, and with about 14 hours of coverage. Now Paris was like across all these platforms. I can't even count the hours, I'm sure, of different kinds.
7,000. It was 7,000.
Okay. It's a big boost.
Yeah. And there's a history to this, right? The Olympics, there's not a lot of events in our country that capture the attention of millions of Americans over 17 days.
Yeah.
And so it's an awesome responsibility. I've worked on the Olympics for about 15 years, but there are many people at NBC that have worked on the Olympics for many, many decades. And you're right. Like, it wasn't that long ago that the way you enjoyed the Olympics was you tuned into the primetime show and you watched 3 hours or maybe 4 hours. And now for Paris, it was 7,000 hours, about 300 live events a day in some cases, and in some days up to 60 concurrent live events happening at the same time. And so it actually introduces a different challenge, which is, how do you navigate that? How do you search that? You can't give somebody 7,000 hours and say, go figure it out. And so it created a really tremendous challenge. And it's one that has been years in the making, because what a lot of people don't appreciate is product and innovation is typically iterative, meaning, if you go back to London 2012, the London Olympics, that was really the first time we made all of the Olympic content available on demand, where you can catch up on demand. And if you watch the Gold Zone, which was something that was very, very popular in Paris, where Scott Hansen was doing, the Gold Zone, we actually experimented with that back in 2016 in Sochi. Oh. We trialed it. We tested it. You test, you learn, and you make it better. And I think Paris, it was almost a decade in the making, and everything just really worked. And it's a real credit to the product teams, to the marketing teams, to the teams that do the primetime show, like Molly Solomon. Everything came together in a way where I felt we were really able to demonstrate putting the customer first. Like, what I wanted for the Paris Olympics was, if you can't go to Paris, which many people just couldn't go, how do you make your home a better seat than being there in Paris? How do you make your phone a better place to watch than if you were there in Paris? And I feel like that's what we were able to deliver upon. And I think the results ultimately spoke for themselves.
For Paris, what worked better than expected? What didn't? And how are those lessons directly informing how you're designing the experience for this winter in Milan Cortina?
I think that what we found, what worked incredibly well, was multi-view, and multi-view, if you remember, was where we were showing up to 4 different events in you can see 4 different events simultaneously. And I think in a world where you've got people who have just a higher tolerance, we're all multitaskers now, and watching 4 things simultaneously is actually not that hard for a lot of people.
Sounds insane a decade ago, but now people are like, no problem. Yeah.
And so that turned out to be incredibly successful for us. And I talked about the Gold Zone. The Gold Zone was also incredibly successful for us. And we also found that people really watched a lot of content on mobile devices. When you look at the consumption across all of our digital platforms for the Paris Olympics, it was 40% higher than all of the digital consumption across all Olympics combined. It's not even measurable. It was unlike anything we had ever seen before. And so when you carry forward some of those elements going into the next Olympics in Milan Cortina, we're not going backwards. And so everything that you saw in Paris is going to now continue to happen in Milan, but we've learned things. So for example, the multi-view, we had only done it on the television because we thought that the TV gives you a much bigger canvas for 4 screens. We actually found that people wanted to watch that on their phones too. And so you're now going to be able to get the multi-view on your phone when you're on the go. We also are going to be testing new features where if you're watching ice skating, you're going to actually be able to pick from multiple feeds. And so you're going to be able to play director. And so, of course, there's going to be the traditional NBC feed, but if you want a feed of like somebody training, or if you want a feed of somebody in the stands, or if you want a feed, which is a camera that's on the coach of one of the skaters, you're actually going to be able to use a feature which is Ringside Live, where you are going to be able to scroll through and you're going to be able to choose from all these different camera angles as well. And remember what I was referring to earlier is that these things that we're developing for the Olympics, in many ways, they are a sandbox. And so we learn from them. And if it works for the Olympics, well, why not apply that to the Premier League? Why not apply that to a show like Traitors, which is very popular. It's actually the number one show right now for unscripted is the show Traitors, meaning giving people more control, giving people more insight. And so there's new features like that we'll be introducing. We're also leaning much more heavily into features that people are very comfortable doing on other platforms and devices. For example, vertical video. Right. Of course, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, you're likely holding your phone vertically. You're probably using your index finger or your thumb to navigate. Well, why not provide all of our clips in a way where you could watch them horizontally, but now you can watch them vertically? And again, it seems so small and subtle, but sometimes the biggest innovations are not as big as you necessarily think. It's all about making it easier for the user and the viewer to find what they want and engage with it on their terms. Yeah. And not try to create necessarily new behavior, but tap into behaviors that people are very familiar with. Like I'll give you one more, which is gaming. Gaming obviously is another one of those areas that people are spending more and more time on gaming. Well, why not have trivia gaming around the Olympics? Yeah. Why not have predictive gaming around the Olympics? And so we're going to be also experimenting with different features all around trying to tap into that behavior around making it more immersive, making it feel more personalized, but also expanding the aperture where, of course, we're going to make all the programming available. But what about all the other type of content around that that you could enjoy as a fan, or you're a fan of an athlete or a fan of a specific sport? And we're going to really try to build off of what we did in Paris and take it to the next level with Milan Cortina.
One thing I like about that idea of giving people the choice to how they want to, say, consume this content or enjoy these sports, there's another way of doing that as well, which is through kind of the voices or personalities or people that they're almost used to engaging with. And I guess Snoop is maybe an early example of that as an entertainer, bringing into the sports realm. For the Paris, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if it was new for Paris, but there was the Creator Collective, which is kind of bringing in different voices of people who have fandoms and followers of their own and bringing them into the Olympic experience, therefore bringing in their fans and followers to come experience that with them. And from what I've read, it was like, there was something more than 300 million views across TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and others of some of this content. You guys are bringing that Creator Collective idea back to the Winter Olympics this year. What did you guys learn from that first iteration? Because that's a pretty new concept and seemed like a great idea and seemed to have gone incredibly well as well.
Again, I give a lot of credit to Gary Zinkel, who's the president of the Olympics, and Molly Solomon, who's the executive producer. They were really the tip of the spear at creating the Creator Collective. And I think it really touches upon what I said earlier, which is it's about how do we find new ways to super serve the fans? And people clearly are consuming video differently now than they did 10 years ago. Yeah. And my kids consume video differently than I do. And if you got new generations who maybe didn't grow up with the Olympics in the same way. Like, how do we reach them? If they are consuming video on social media, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or Meta, tapping into that younger demographic is going to be critical for the longevity and the future of the Olympics. And so it was a very important dimension to how we saw the opportunity to grow audiences and reach new audiences. And you're exactly right. It was about 25 influencers. These influencers combined reach about 65 million followers. And so these are some people who have real credibility in their respective areas. And what we did was we paired them up with some of our producers where we gave these creators access to the athletes, to behind the scenes. We gave them the tools where they could produce their own video on site. They were in Paris. And it turned out to be an incredibly huge hit. Like you said, it generated over 300 million views. It did about 6.5 billion impressions. And so having that be another way to reach audiences, but also we have our primetime show, which is best in class, and we do great storytelling, and Mike Tirico and the team do such a good job, just telling you behind the scenes of these athletes and some of the history. But you're also going to get it through a very different lens of an influencer. And so why not give them that same opportunity and stage to do that? And so we're carrying that forward, as you mentioned, in Milan. It's a very similar program. There's also going to be podcasting. Podcasting, of course, is another area that just continues to get momentum. And so having these influencers available with the same tools, we're also connecting them with some of our advertising partners to help them monetize some of the content that's being created from this program. But to have that in place and then to continue building upon it, it's become a very important new way for us to grow and reach audiences. And again, it taps into that bigger vision of how do we super serve the fans and how do we ultimately put the viewer and give them all the tools that they need to have what they want, when they want it, where they want it. And the creator program was just another way for us to deliver upon that.
My last question is around just kind of looking ahead between now and 103. What strategic bet are you guys making now that you think will matter most in the next few years? We've talked about all of the things, the kind of incremental and iterative work you guys have done over the last decade or so. What are you thinking about maybe what's in its embryonic stages now that you're making bets for the next few years?
Well, I alluded to some of it, but it all starts with doubling down on how do we super serve the fandoms that play to our strengths as a company. And I think that's always been our strategy and our vision. Like, we don't compare ourselves to what others are doing. We're kind of playing our own hand. And I think that what we've always believed is that broadcast and having a broadcast network is a tremendous asset to us as a company. It's a megaphone. And so in one sense, how do we better manage as a portfolio, as I mentioned, and this notion of centralizing all the teams to start making decisions around how do we get maximum reach? And so an example of this is, there's a show on Peacock called The Paper, which Greg Daniels produced, who also produced The Office. Yeah. And we premiered that show on Peacock, did incredibly well for us. We announced we're renewing another season. And then we said, well, why don't we actually air the show 6 months later on NBC? Now, that would have been a very controversial decision because broadcast is always thought of as the first window, and then you put stuff on streaming the next day. And we made the decision, Donna Langley and her team get a lot of credit for this, but we then put The Paper on NBC, and we got another bite at the apple because it found different audiences on broadcast that were on streaming. But there was also a call to action that said, hey, if you want to watch next week's episode now, go to Peacock, because every episode was already available on Peacock. Well, now you've created a different kind of a flywheel, which is how does broadcast and streaming work better together? How do you start aligning these audiences, again, to get broader reach? And so that's partly how we're thinking of things, which is we have this ability to manage as a portfolio. How do we better leverage those assets to show up in a way that's almost platform agnostic? And then when people do come to our platforms, like I was talking about with Peacock, how do we really super serve those fandoms in a way that goes beyond just the traditional video? And it's not about subscribers, it's about share of time. And how do we continue to take more share of time? And so continuing to lean into things like podcasting, gaming, vertical video, finding new ways to provide interactivity on our platform. So we really start to think of ourselves more as a entertainment destination than just a streaming destination. Those things in concert is really where we see the huge opportunity for our company. And we've got the entire company aligned around that vision, which is incredibly exciting for us.
Nice. Well, look, I look forward to being a part of legendary February, watching the Super Bowl, the Winter Olympics, and the NBA All-Star Game and beyond. Matt, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And remember, the Super Bowl's in 4K. You'll be able to watch it in 4K HDR. And the Olympics will also be on the same day in 4K HDR. And so, again, another example of us really trying to deliver upon the best video experience for viewers at home. And so thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and speak to your audience.
Nice. Thanks again.
Okay, we're back with Adam, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each one of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we're following, business or otherwise. And Adam, since you're our guest, what are you keeping tabs on?
Can I give more than one?
You can give more than one.
Okay. I love that Mozilla just announced this AI off switch for Firefox.
I saw just the headline of this. I haven't.
Are they the first
dug
company
into it.
to allow you to opt out? Like, is that the first instance?
Well, beyond like the Cloudflare,
Yeah.
like back end level, like anti-scraping stuff, but like on the consumer facing level.
On the consumer face, you can make choices about specific tools, but this is sort of a universal, I don't want any AI in here, which is sort of a response to the backlash of pushing AI into everything. So I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see
Like
the
does Chrome-
business reaction to that. Yeah, because like companies haven't seemed to care at all that people keep saying like, we don't want this, like get rid of
No.
this. Like, I don't want this pop up in Teams. I don't want it auto populated on my Google search. And they are just like, whatever, deal with it. And
Yeah.
And now
yeah.
it'll be interesting if there's like data about how many people sort of turn this off and what that really says.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then one thing that's definitely not AI, I've been loving. So Mark Ronson, the DJ/producer, has a great memoir out called Night People,
Ooh.
which is all about DJing and New York nightlife in the 90s, and is a great book about creating a vibe in real life, making analog music.
I love the Club Kid stuff.
Yeah, very cool.
That is actually a nice compliment to AI because it's like back to when people made things with their own brains.
Yeah, for sure. And also DJing was actually like a hard thing to do in the 90s.
Yeah, without that technology.
The vinyl-based, highly technical physical skill. Yeah.
I don't mean to besmirch DJs now, but if you're watching the new Vanderpump Rules re-up, there's a great Lisa Vanderpump quote where one of her employees comes up to her and says, "I've been getting into DJing," and it cuts to her confessional and she goes, "Do I need another DJ? Honestly." And I was like, yeah, no, you don't. We don't, you don't. But in the 90s, it was an actual like skill set that you had to do. I love that. Kristin, what are you keeping tabs on?
Oh, well, ahead of the Super Bowl, I'm keeping tabs, obviously, on what Bad Bunny does. I think that's going to be really interesting to see. There's already been some rumors about different things.
Do we know who his like guest
I haven't
artists
seen.
are going to be?
I think he's keeping everything pretty close, which will be interesting. But separately keeping tabs on this Turning Point USA halftime
The All-American
show,
halftime
the conservative takeover. I mean,
God.
we were talking about this earlier. Bad Bunny is like, if not the number one,
Other than
the
Taylor
top,
Swift, I think Bad Bunny is the
most
number one
popular
global
artist.
artist.
It's not a political decision that he would be doing the Super Bowl. Obviously, he's spoken out about politics, but it's just the way that people are up in arms about this and think that the answer is Kid Rock as another draw
God,
is sort of interesting.
Yeah, Kid Rock. I'll be interested to see what numbers it draws and like what the commentary will be during the game and during that halftime show. I'm going to toggle back and forth between X and Blue Sky just to see the
You'll get entirely different stories there. Yeah,
that'll be great.
That'll
I love
be interesting. Just a wild sort of real divergence of our culture to watch in this Saturday
Oh my God.
or Sunday.
Yeah, it's so weird. Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah, show up on Saturday and watch it.
What are you keeping tabs on, Josh?
So have either of you been following the Moltbook stuff? It's all of these AI agents that were put into this Reddit-style forum, and it really became some of the stupidest commentary of people around AI, because everyone was like, oh my God, look at, they're like, most of it was just slop, but some of it was like, they're like plotting against their creators and talking about consciousness and this sort of feedback loop. And it's just like, this is the craziest sci-fi thing. And I wanted to just be like, y'all, these are just stochastic parrots. It's the same thing as putting speakers next to each other. I've said this before on the podcast, but every mistake that people make around AI, I think it's two things. When people underestimate how much of like human behavior is pattern recognition, which means that AI can do really incredible things and replicate some things that humans can do, because so much of what we do, processing, is just pattern recognition, but it's not all of what we do. And then on the other side of it is people who assume human or anthropomorphize these AIs into something that they're just not. They're large-scale pattern recognizers, and it's a transformative technology, but these are not real people talking to each other.
I saw some discussion about this where it was saying that these bots were starting to say on the platform, like, oh, the humans are watching us, the humans are screenshotting us.
Because every human's on the internet being like, the AIs are watching us. You know how much sci-fi text we have that's been scraped about this exact thing? It's honestly, it drives me a little bit crazy. I feel this way also about, and partly this is a vestige because I work in video and I work in like audio and multimedia and stuff like that. Every time there's a new like VO3 comes out, or what's the video generator from Google, something stupid banana or something like that. Now I can't remember off the top of my head.
Banana.
Yes. Every time like a new video gets generated out of there and people are like, it's over for the entertainment industry. And I'm like, y'all, this is not good video. It's genuinely impressive that I can type in, Shrimp Jesus playing soccer, and it'll generate that in 5 minutes. But it's not good video. Like, we all need to realize, like, separate the novelty from the reality of it, and stop, like, thinking that, like, the future of entertainment's gonna be just people typing things in and generating content. And I think we know that now because Sora 2, that app came out. Everyone used it as a novelty for 2 weeks. And then have you heard a single fucking thing about Sora 2 as a social media app or that sort of thing? Like, people are consistently like, oh, get this AI slop off of my Instagram feed. Like, we're still at that level yet. Maybe it gets there. I don't know. But this was infuriating to me over the weekend.
I like that with Moltbook. Like, there's been this fear that, most of the internet is just going to be AI bots talking to each other, like the dead internet theory. And they were like, we'll just make that happen now.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
They never stopped to ask if they should.
Yeah, it'll be wild to keep watching, though, and to see how long this trend lives.
Oh, God. Well, so much of it was already like fake or inputted already. Like, people were kind of like, hey, you guys know that most of the stuff was also just like, it wasn't just agents acting on their own. It was their users putting in stuff and prompting stuff along. So it's like, okay, that happens too. But then the other thing behind this is like Claude bots are like extremely destructive. People have been using them on their apps and it's just been like deleting stuff off of email and like just doing so crazy things. Because it has access to all these apps and they're not super well made. So they just sort of cause chaos on people's computers. I was like, you're electively basically installing malware.
like a toddler computer. Malware, like just giving over everything.
Yeah, it's toddler malware. Oh, God. I say that now and then the bots come for me. All right, we're going to leave it there for the show. Adam, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you guys so much. Great to be on. Appreciate it.
And that's it for Most Innovative Companies. Our show is produced by Blake Odom, Sam Gebauer, Hawa Otori, and Mariam Kiparowitse. Editing by Matt Toder, mix and sound design by Tad Wadhams and Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is me. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we will see you next week.